Well, Zuma was very much an album of consolidation, I felt. It wasn't a transitory work in the sense of, oh, I don't quite know what I'm doing here, I'm going to try some new experiment. It was Neil Young using the best of his electric and acoustic to, strong effect. It was actually an incredibly commercial album, I always thought. And it was almost belatedly, I was quite astonished to see its relatively poor chart performance on both sides of the Atlantic, really. Particularly in America, it didn't do any better than Time Fades Away in a Billboard chart, which astonished me, because I always thought, well, Time Fades Away was this incredibly uncommercial album, and that Zuma was quite a very commercial album. It had, Don't Cry No Tears, very poppy and radio friendly, it seemed to me. So it was interesting on reflection that its sales, as far as if we're to believe the Billboard chart, weren't as strong as one might have assumed. I think that album is probably dominated by Cortez the Killer. Whatever else you think about the rest of it, which is good, eclectic and stuff, but here we have a Neil Young epic in the middle of it, which takes the album up about 6 notches.
I think Cortez the Killer is, just one of the great epics in electric rock and roll. It was like this kind of, I don't know, like molten lava, just sort of flows in this sort of really majestic way. And I think what's so fantastic about Neil Young's 70s music is that it's so unclean. It's so sort of visceral, his guitar playing. It seems to flow from this really intuitive, emotional place in Neil. Like all his great epic tracks, like A Hurricane, they just seem to sort of pour out of somewhere that no other rock and roll comes from.
Cortez, I think, may well be, ought to be, possibly Neil Young's one of his most loved tracks from his fans. I think if you did a poll of what were the greatest Neil Young tracks, that's always going to be in there. It was Crazy Horse on a sophisticated level, but it had feel, it had real apparent emotion to it, and a depth that you didn't always get when Neil Young was doing long electric songs, but there you did, and it was perfectly placed on that album, and one of the highlights of his 70s career, probably.
In a single decade, Young had found his voice and then departed from a band now seen as pivotal in the history of rock music. He had developed a sound with Crazy Horse that distinguished him from his contemporaries. He had found international fame, both with the supergroup Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and then with his own country-tinged material. And with his mid-70s career, had retreated into a far darker world, only to emerge anew with Zuma. This first era of Young's career would be a tough act to follow.
Well, to maintain the level of quality, brilliance that he did from the late 60s really through the 70s was remarkable. And you get people talking about which albums are our favorites or better, and I'd say like Time Fades Away, which a lot of people dismiss. It was a great album. On the Beach sometimes gets slagged. But he really did have a consistency during those first 15 years of his career that it would have to be hard to match over the course of a 30-year career, a lifelong career, really.
I mean, there are some great Neil Young records post mid-70s, but I think what you could say is that all of the great themes of his songwriting and the trademarks of his career are in place and have been explored in that series of albums from 1969 with Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere through to Zuma. I think that's the classic period. That is where he's put down all his markers, and although there will be departures later on, really most of what he did subsequently built on what he laid down in that period of time.